Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. My name is Thomas Varela. I serve as the Director of Advocacy and Communications for the Urban League of Philadelphia. We're excited to have you this evening for this important conversation as we talk about an important historic lawsuit that has occurred in Pennsylvania. Many of you may or may not be aware, there actually is a lawsuit that is closing out focus on school funding. And we at the Urban League have been laser focused on this lawsuit because we recognize it as a civil rights issue. And we're excited to welcome our host partners to help support us in this event. We have the Urban League of Philadelphia, the 100 Black Men of Philadelphia, Coalition of Labor Union Women, PA Youth Vote, the Omega chapter, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Philadelphia Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Pennsylvania Association of Alpha Chapters, National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Pennsylvania chapter, Northeast Against Racism, the Urban League Guild of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia NAACP, and the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and vicinity. So as you can see, a strong collection of service organizations that have come together to amplify this important topic. We're excited to have Andrea Custis, who's the president and CEO of the Urban League, provide some opening remarks and talk about what this lawsuit has meant for as a civil rights issue. Looks like she stepped away. Looks like you might have lost her. So I'll provide some brief context. So there were a group of legislators, a group of organizations, school districts, parents came together to sue essentially the legislature, saying that the schools are not funded adequately and equitably. They have fought, they have felt that the school funding, the money that is available to our to our students is not arrived at the same way. So they took action in amplifying this issue. We have several stakeholders that have been monitoring the situation. Today, we actually held a vigil to kind of commemorate the end of this lawsuit. So if you follow #EdVigil on social media, you can actually monitor the conversation and what was said as it relates to all the vigils that happened today. At 3 p.m. there was a vigil. There's vigils happening in Norristown and Lancaster and all parts of the Commonwealth. While Andrea's coming back on, Senator Hughes, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can provide a bit of that context from that civil rights perspective. I know the work that you do to really amplify why money should be allocated to our schools. So Senator Hughes, a long time champion of the Urban League and more importantly, just issues in the urban community. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me just thank everybody for getting on the call. Thomas gave some of the broad strokes of the lawsuit, and the lawyers are on the call and they'll speak to the details of it. But just understand this, Pennsylvania ranks almost dead last, up down there with Alabama, Mississippi, and other states like that with respect to how much it funds public education and how discriminatorily it funds public education. Black and brown children all across Pennsylvania are getting hammered and have been hammered not for decades, but for centuries with respect to how public education is funded, how their schools are being funded. So after all the years of protest, after all the attempts to try to right this wrong, after all the legislation and budgets have been fought for over the years, these group of lawyers and plaintiffs, which they'll talk about in a little bit, made the decision to go into court because everything else was not working. The legislature was not responding, even though the Constitution requires the legislature to respond and to do it in a constitutional and just fashion. So the lawyers went to court. The case was heard. The arguments were made. Some of you may have followed it throughout the process. Some of you may have been intermittent throughout the process. but I just need to say this. And I need to make sure that you all understand exactly how the opponents of fair funding, the opponents of adequate funding, how they feel about our children, about all of the children of Pennsylvania, but it's most specifically how they feel about our children. The lawyer representing the Senate Republican caucus, paid for, high-priced legal fees paid for by your and my tax dollars, said in the courtroom, well, don't you think, and my camera is moving because I'm getting hyped up. Don't you think, this is what the lawyer said representing the other side, don't you think some kids deserve to be on the McDonald's track, deserve to be hamburger flippers? And they don't need to study algebra. They don't need to study biology, because all we really need them to do is to be really good hamburger flippers, to be on the McDonald's track. In open court, this attorney said this, representing the Senate Republican caucus, paid for, high-priced legal fees, paid for by yours and mine taxpayer dollars. So brazen, so blatant. This is what we're fighting against. This is why this lawsuit had to be introduced. And I'll just wrap up by saying this. We are in an environment right now where this matter could be, in many respects, resolved. We have significant budget surpluses in Harrisburg right now. Well over $7 billion in surplus. Well over $2.25 billion in unspent rainy day fund, unspent American Rescue Plan funds. Well over $2.8 billion in the state's rainy day fund. We've got the money, but the deal is this. Even if we didn't have the money, these children need to be put first in this conversation because they need to be prioritized. They need to not have their life and their future determined by essentially racist attitudes that feel that our children are not important. So I applaud everyone who's been involved in this fight. I applaud the lawyers for taking it on, for having to spend the last 3 or 4 months living in Harrisburg fighting this lawsuit because the case was heard in Commonwealth Court here in Harrisburg, and being away from their families, being away from their homes. I applaud them, but this is God's mission here. This is the good work that's being done. And we need to salute them, we need to thank them, and we need to hear what they have to say about what they feel may be the outcome or what they feel are the highlights, and in some cases, the lowlights that have occurred in this lawsuit. If we don't stand and fight for our children, who will? Why do we expect anyone else to stick up for our kids if we don't stick up for them ourselves? So thanks to the Urban League, thanks to everyone for convening and bringing this group together. This is a great group of people, and this is the right fight, and this is the right time. Let's wage this war, and let's win it, because we can, we should, and we must. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Senator Hughes, as always, bringing this issue and making it plain to the larger community. So as you know, we had a visual this afternoon, but as we know, many of our parents have to work, have to provide for their family, so they don't have the luxury to always leave work to attend. So we wanted to bring this visual to the community. And as we know, as African Americans, we know that our organizations and individuals serve as the bedrock of our community, our Divine Line organizations, our service organizations. And we wanted to make sure that we bring these organizations to the table and give them a chance to kind of talk about what they see, because they have families, they have parents within these organizations, and they are doing this work. And as we know, many times for free, because they're passionate about this work. So before we have Charlene Collins speak, Andre, I see that you were able to join us. Are you connected?
I have to tell you, I just spoke to all of you, and I guess I was speaking to myself. I don't know what happened, but I'll just be real brief since we already started.
And we
a
were
couple.
able to have Senator Hughes speak, so just for context.
Okay, excellent. So for those of you who know or don't know, the Urban League of Philadelphia is a civil rights organization, 105 years old. And so what do we do? Social justice and economic empowerment. So education is absolutely a civil rights issue. It absolutely is. And when you look at what the history has been here in the Commonwealth, it hasn't been over a short period of time. It has been decades that we have not had the funding that we need. We think it's okay up in Harrisburg not to fund Black kids and Latino kids at the same rate that we are funding white kids in the city of Philadelphia, in other areas outside of Philadelphia. It's unacceptable. So I'm gonna put the label on it that it is systemic racism. This is intentional. That's where I'm coming from. It is intentional. You could make this right. Why do we have to do a lawsuit to try to make this right? We've had an opportunity to do it. And if there ever was an opportunity to do it, and I've learned that so much from working with Senator Hughes, is the money is in Harrisburg, but we have chosen to keep that money and not use it. There are 89 other people that are like me with the Urban League throughout the United States of America. And this shenanigans that we are doing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is not what a lot of cities and states are doing. They are spending the money that they were allocated, that they were given to do the right things. So I am baffled by the lack of love, care, and to right a wrong. When I look at it, I looked at 100 school districts that were the furthest away from adequate funding. And here's what we know who they educate. This is not by happenstance again. 65% were Black students. 58% were students in poverty. 64% were English learners, and 58% were Latinx students. I don't think that's by happenstance. I think that is targeted. And when I look at other school districts, many times Philadelphia needs to get twice what they're getting in funding. We also looked at 277 school districts. That's more than half the number of school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And in all of those 277 students, they needed to allocate at least $2,000 more per student in order to provide adequate support, not great support, but adequate support. The lawsuit has the potential to right the wrongs of what has happened in Harrisburg. But we can fix that. All we have to do is use the money that we've been allocated that is sitting up in Harrisburg. That's what we can do. And yet we choose not to. So I will tell you that I believe that every child, I don't care who you are, every child deserves a quality education. Every child deserves to work to their full potential. And we are absolutely not adhering and not in the spirit of the law, because it is absolutely a civil obligation that we have. We are not doing that. So I would say to my friends up in Harrisburg, get it together and do the right thing. But if not, Dan and the other group of lawyers will make you right the wrongs that you have done for decades. Thomas, thank you for letting me make a few comments.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea. And now we would like to have Charlene Collins, president of the Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here this evening. As Ms. Custis said, this is definitely a civil right, but more importantly, we need to look at our own communities, right? You have Overbrook High School in West Philadelphia, and not too far in the distance, you have Lower Merion High School. It's the tale of two cities. And why is that? Why do we continue to allow zip codes to define the level of education that our children receive? It is a terrible injustice. And with that being said, when you just think about when you look at our urban areas, when you look at where our Black and brown students go to school, and you think about what has happened, when we say public schools are failing our children. So then we had the pop-up of the charter movement, which is fine. Everyone should have a choice about where their child goes to school. But what it has done is also, you don't see those in those communities where they pay almost $20,000 per student to fund their education, where they're able to give a quality education. You don't see charter schools popping up the way you do within these urban areas and where our Black and brown students live. And yes, they are still servicing students, but why is it okay just for our kids? And if it's a great system, then why not for all children? So we really need to take a look, and we definitely should be asking our lawmakers, why do we continue not to fund our schools equitably? Because at the end of the day, you're right, we can move, but we choose to be residents of Philadelphia. We choose to stay here. And if we're going to do that, we should be providing a quality education to our students. I'm an educator. I started my teaching career in Philadelphia. I then went on to William Penn, where I saw poverty on a whole nother level, and where definitely the tax dollars came off the back of the residents and what they paid in real estate tax, and therefore they didn't have enough funding, similar to Philadelphia, to educate their students who look the same. So I think we really need to take, as a whole collective, we really need to rethink how we look at public education and really begin to demand for our students what's right. Because this argument, someone says, been going on for centuries. I saw in the chat. It has, and it will continue if we don't join this fight to ensure that all of our kids the quality education they deserve.
Thank you very much, Charlene, for those points. We now want to invite Tiffany Wilson, who will be representing Dr. Penny Nixon as from the Philadelphia Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Good evening, Thomas. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Tiffany A. Wilson, and on behalf of Dr. Penny Sparks Nixon, the president of the Philadelphia Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, we thank you for the invitation to join this critical conversation. Ms. Collins mentioned the distance between Overbrook High School and Lower Marion High School. The walking distance is short, however, the funding distance is great. We all know the impact and the value of a first-class public education on Black and brown children. In a city with a poverty rate of 25.8, 1 out of every 3.9 residents of Philadelphia lives in poverty. For many, education serves as their ticket out of poverty. For too long, our children have languished in schools without functioning libraries, old dusty books, outdated technology, unreasonable class sizes, lack of nurses and school counselors, inadequate support services, and teachers that look like them. The fair funding lawsuit challenges these inadequate and inequitable school funding systems that have negatively impacted the most vulnerable students and schools in our city and across the state of Pennsylvania. We believe that the fair funding lawsuit is long overdue. A win will afford our schools the resources they truly need and deserve to access a quality education that puts them on the path for a bright future. Educational development is one of our organization's core components, our 5-point programmatic thrust, and one of our focuses. The Philadelphia Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is committed and rededicating ourselves to the fair funding fight. Our children and families deserve more. You have a partner in us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. And as we know, we're talking about the future. And we know for many of us as leaders, we are preparing and trying to support the next generation. But we know our students have been part of this fight, and they have been committed to this issue from the beginning. And we want to invite Rebecca Allen, who is a student representative on the Philadelphia Board of Education, to talk a little bit about what the school funding mean for her and her classmates and her colleagues across the school. So Rebecca.
Thank you. My name is Rebecca Allen, and I'm a member of PA Youth Vote. And so at PA Youth Vote, we work to get more and more high school students registered to vote, as many as we can. And this is because we believe that as by getting more and more high school students registered to vote as soon as they can, then we will be able to see more of the changes that we have been fighting for several years as a collective and as a society. One of the big things about getting high school students registered, there isn't enough civic engagement and education. Thankfully in Philadelphia, we just got a resolution passed so that we can get more education about voter education and registration. But students are most of the time like, why am I supposed to vote? What is that all about? Well, if more students are registered to vote, and they know that what it looks like to be in a classroom where the school is underfunded, in a district that's underfunded. These are the issues that students care about, is being able to be in their classroom and know that they're safe, and know that they will be able to have resources, and not have this incredible gap between what the resources and the opportunities available to them are based off of where they live in the city, or how well they can achieve in their lower grades in order to get into the best schools and to have the opportunities that they need to get out and find their ways out. There shouldn't have to be a way out, but because the system is built in order to stop students from being students of color, specifically Black and brown students, from being able to make it out of the cycle and get it out of the system that is built to fail them. There's a reason why in third grade, that's the third grade reading levels is why is how our government chooses how many prisons they need to make, because that's where our funding is going. Our funding is going to building more prisons to keep people inside of these horrible systems, and to stop them from being able to vote, and to have their voices heard, and to make the changes that we have been fighting for all of these years. So as a member of PA Youth Vote and as an organization, we are continuously fighting for fair funding, because that is how we will actually find change in our society.
Great, thank you very much. And we know the future is bright when we know students like you are stepping up and making your voice heard. And as we know the hashtag Women History Month is Trust Black Women, and we continue to do so. But do know that men are still part of this fight as well. And we are here sharing our support and making sure that all voices are part of the table. So at this time, I want to have Reverend Robert Carlier join us on the screen. As you can imagine, from the faith community, longstanding bedrock of our community, to make sure that we're supported, that we make the moral argument to this country as to why we as African Americans must be protected and served. So we want to thank Robert Collier and all faith leaders in their longstanding commitment. So Reverend Collier, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I am thankful for the opportunity to make some remarks concerning the fair funding of Pennsylvania school. The Black clergy of Philadelphia vicinity was started 40 years ago as a result of a prolonged Philadelphia district school teachers strike in 1981. Thus, we have always fought for progress in education. It has been Black clergy's goal to see that our schools are adequately funded. We are all aware of the disparity in funding based on zip code and race. This is unacceptable. A child in zip code 19143, Southwest Philly, deserves the same educational opportunities as the child in 19083, Lower Merion. We need to urge Harrisburg to revise the school funding formula currently being utilized, for the child who needs the most gets the least because of where they live. We all must join together in this crucial fight to educate our children so that they can enjoy a better quality of life. We must demand funding that will provide our children with resources necessary to meet the challenges that they face currently and what they will face in the future. No one should rest well at night until the child who lives in North Philadelphia has access to the same quality of education as the child who lives in Radnor, which is only 16 miles away. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Collier. And as we know, we had many of our service organizations, the Line 9 organizations. Mentorship is key to our community, making sure that we uplift the next generation. But we also know there are other Black-led organizations that are doing that work. Organizations like National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and also the 100 Black Men of Philadelphia, longstanding commitment towards mentorship and uplifting the next generation. So at this time, we want to invite Joel Wilson, president of the Philadelphia chapter of the 100 Black Men, to provide some perspective.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Joel Wilson. I am the president and board chair of the 100 Black Men of Philadelphia. We are a national brotherhood of successful Black men founded in 1963 who come together with our time, our treasure, and resources to provide mentoring and opportunities to deserving youth in our communities. Our pillars are mentoring, leadership, health and wellness, economic empowerment, and education. We proudly join in his moral fight in support of the 2014 lawsuit to bring fair and equitable funding to all public schools in the state of PA. A quality education is a civil rights issue and a constitutional right in the state of Pennsylvania. Across the state, the 100 school districts furthest away from adequate funding education are 65% of Pennsylvania's impacting Black students, 58% of Pennsylvania's Latinx students, 58% of Pennsylvania students in poverty. Each year, our district has struggled to meet the challenges that many of our students face. And now in Philadelphia, the combination of inadequate education funding, COVID, and gun violence, our city is plagued in perpetual trauma. When poor kids, children of color, English second learners, you have a lack of adequate resources, a lack of adequate reading, math specialists, lack of technology. It is no doubt that our youth are going to suffer. So again, we are in full support of this lawsuit, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the organizations providing perspective. As we talked about, these organizations are on the front line, engaging many times and all times for free, volunteering their time to make sure that our community is being served. Now, you may be wondering, okay, we heard a lot of perspective in terms of the parents, but actually, what was this lawsuit? What was this experience since November, where lawyers were in Harrisburg fighting to ensure and fighting to make the argument that that our schools need to be funded. And we're excited to have Dan join us, who was one of the lawyers who was part of this lawsuit, to kind of provide that historical perspective and some context as to what they were doing in Harrisburg. So Dan, I want to thank you for all the work that you've done and advocating on behalf of all residents and all citizens and across the Commonwealth. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for having me. So you've already heard a good amount about the background of this lawsuit, but just to say one more time, in 2014, 6 school districts, including the William Penn School District, 2 statewide organizations, including the NAACP, Pennsylvania State Conference, as well as a number of families, brought a challenge under the Pennsylvania Constitution's education clause and equal protection provisions, alleging the Commonwealth was underfunding public schools. You know, the evidence, I mean, sometimes trials are clarified, and the evidence that was put forward included that Pennsylvania's achievement gaps are among the biggest in the country. And no matter where you look, if you look at an outcome, and we went through this with witnesses from the Department of Education, if you look at AP exams and SAT results and PSSAs and the Keystone and college entrance rates and college graduation rates, you have unacceptable achievement gaps, and they are large. So, for example, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 20% of African American students are proficient in math standards. 20%, and in Pennsylvania, among those students who are actually go on to graduate high school, only 1 in 5 African American students will go on to get a college degree, a 2 or 4 year degree. Right? These are huge, awful achievement gaps. And so we asked the Department of Education, well, you know, what are the cause of those gaps? And they said the cause of those gaps are what we all know them to be. There's systemic inequity in our school funding system. Now, the Department of Education is not the only defendant in the case, right? We also have against the General Assembly, and they take a slightly different perspective. But the cause of these huge gaps are obvious, right? The cause of these gaps are because in places that educate the most historically underserved children, Black students, Latino students, low-income students, when a child goes to kindergarten and a child needs a reading specialist, child might not get a reading specialist. right? Even though that is an intervention that teachers know will have a difference, and educators know will have a difference. If the district doesn't have the money, they don't give it to them. If a child goes to school with trauma, right, and that trauma is a barrier to learning, that child needs a counselor to help them. You know, a child may or may not get that if their school district can't afford it. And so we see all over the Commonwealth is what a lot of us have lived, and a lot of you all have lived, and what any parent in Philadelphia or the William Penn School District sees every day, which is that children are triaged. The triage is if they're going into a hospital as opposed to into a kindergarten. And so what this lawsuit seeks to do is upend that system, because what we believe is that the Pennsylvania Constitution requires that every child, no matter how fortunate they are, no matter which side of City Line Avenue they're born on, that they deserve the high quality education that allows them to live up to their potential. So we spent the last 14 weeks in Harrisburg trying to make that a reality. The road ahead of us is still quite long, and we still need people to stay involved. If we are so fortunate enough to win, and we won't know whether we have won for quite some time, probably not until maybe the late summer. What's going to happen is that there will be a finding that the system is in fact unconstitutional, that the outcomes that we see for students are not acceptable. And if that happens, what's going to happen is the legislature is going to be given some time to fix it. And so at that point, what we really need from engaged members of the public is to demand that once and for all, they do it right. They don't come back to court with a half measure, that they actually once and for all give our kids the education they deserve. So if there's any specific questions at any point, I'm happy to answer them, but I just want to thank you all for being involved and for supporting the lawsuit.
Thank you, Dan, for all the work that you've done. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at tvarela@urbanleaguephila.org, and I can connect you with Dan so that we can get your questions answered as it relates to all things lawsuit. So as we talked about today, there was actually organizations across the Commonwealth hosting events similar to this to ensure that we uplift the importance of this lawsuit, and more importantly, to draw attention to what's happening around school funding. We know in our community, we don't always have the luxury to leave work to attend a daytime event. So we hosted this virtual presentation in order to highlight the work that we're doing on this issue. But we were able to record the 3 o'clock event, and thus we want to take a few minutes and show portions of the presentation. We'll be hearing from Superintendent Height, and also another student that spoke. So if you just give me a few seconds, we'll share my screen.
Thank you, Donna and the Children's First PA for organizing today's rally. Thank you, Andre. And I want to also give a huge shout out to the Ed Law Center for the tremendous work she did in Harrisburg. I know that as a student of theirs who was prepared to testify in the fair funding trial. So can we give it up again for the education? So over the last couple of days, I've had an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to think about my remarks today. And I thought about the 9 years of budget hearings in the council chambers behind us, and the countless visits to Harrisburg to try to persuade individuals during the state budget season to provide more monies for schools. And that was everyone from governors to legislators. I thought about the annual outreach from students, from parents, from advocates, from teachers, from administrators, from community members about the school district's proposed investments. I thought about how too often our response to pleas for smaller class sizes, for building improvements, more staff, more supplies, pointed back to limited revenue that could not be stretched far enough to give our children the type of education they deserve. The type of education we see delivered in students or to students who live in wealthier communities, just a few miles outside of the city limits. When I started in Philadelphia in 2012, the district was on the precipice of financial chaos, in large part by decisions made in Harrisburg to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from the school district's budget. The state budget cuts forced us to lay off critically important staff, counselors, administrators, teachers, individuals who did art and music in our schools, support staff, and our students and schools saw eliminated extracurricular activities and closed school buildings. Schools opened my first year with the bare minimum. Many of you remember that, unfortunately. Since then, we've made steady progress to improve our budget position and invested in schools and students. We've refilled positions, added academic programs, and reestablished student activities. We've ended the year with a positive fund balance for the last 6 years, and we now have an investment-grade credit rating. While there is much more to do, we've made steady progress to modernize classrooms, where we can upgrade training equipment, make repairs, and remediate environmental hazards. And we've seen some improvements in our funding, particularly with the state funding formula. The challenge with that is it only sends a portion of monies through that formula. If they sent all of the monies through that formula, we would see dramatic improvements. If they sent all of the money through the formula, we would see dramatic improvements. But let's not get it twisted. Just sending money through the formula is not sufficient. We also need additional monies to educate children in public schools across the Commonwealth. And the state and the city have made annual progress to increase educational funding. But despite these gains, the system for funding schools in Pennsylvania remains inequitable and inadequate. And too few dollars flow through the new formula, and new investments have not kept pace with the increases in mandated budget costs to deal with the increasing needs of students. And so as a result, unfortunately, here in the city of Philadelphia and in too many communities across the Commonwealth, students continue to be shortchanged. In January, I traveled to Harrisburg to testify in the fair funding lawsuit. I testified because our students here in the city of Philadelphia deserve a high-quality education. I testified because educational opportunities should not be limited to students who live in affluent communities. I testified because I want the next superintendent. I want the next superintendent of the school district of Philadelphia to be able to focus on student outcomes and the professionals who educate our students, and not on an inevitable budget crisis year after year. And so, equitable and adequate funding for education would translate to an additional $5,584 per student. This would be transformational for the students here in Philadelphia. And I know my time is ending, but I want to share with you a conversation I had with a colleague out of Baltimore. And that individual just talked about the new funding formula in the state of Maryland. And I worked in Maryland before I came here. It was something called the Thornton formula. And then after the Thornton formula, the former chancellor there, Kerwin, did a task force. And that task force just released its plans, which meant that school districts, particularly those that educated children who were more at risk, and the larger concentrations of poverty, larger concentrations of children who were learning English, and children with special needs received a lot more. And as a result of that, they have just created a formula in Maryland that sufficiently funds schools that limits class sizes. That limits class sizes to 24 across the state. Now, if the state of Maryland can do that, certainly with the surplus that exists now in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania could do that as well. And so I'm encouraging every legislator and the governor and everyone else to increase funding for education and use that surplus that's sitting there right now to get our young people, not just here in the city of Philadelphia, but across the Commonwealth in public schools, what they need. Donna, thank you.
$12 billion going into the state rainy day fund. Unacceptable. It's raining now. Now, like I said, we're not here today because this is where City Council goes to work every day.
Going to show one more clip of a student who spoke this evening as well.
To introduce one of those students, really who we fight for, and that is Michaela Jones from Central High School. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. You are part of history. You're here because you decided it's not okay for Harrisburg to keep funding our schools unfairly and inequitably. I go to Central High School. At my school, we're lucky, although we do not have the same resources wealthy school districts have. Fortunately, our alumni does provide us with equipment and tools that some of my friends within the same school district do not have. Unlike Central, they do not have a variety of elective courses fit to assist students with their future careers. A private, well-stocked library accessible to students before and after school. Or free higher-level courses which allow students to test out of expensive college classes. And unfortunately, they do not have alumni to close those gaps and provide those crucial assets that influence academic success. But it should not be that our schools rely on charity. Pennsylvania's Constitution says it must provide every child attending a public school with thorough and efficient education, and it doesn't. From an early age, children like me are taught to know the difference between right and wrong, and this is wrong. Students like me should not get less of an education because we do not live within a wealthy school district. We should not be told to make do with what we have and be satisfied. The adults in Harrisburg should not get to decide that I'm not worth investing in because they think I'm not on track to success. How am I expected to succeed without the tools to do so? They do not know my track or who I am or who I will become. I'm talented. I can achieve my goals and that I will. I am persistent, motivated, and determined. But all the persistence, motivation, and determination in the world will not get me or my classmates the tools, resources, or services we need to achieve our goals and get our careers. Adequate and equitable funding will. Making sure I graduate with competitive skills will. Ensuring that I have access to challenging courses before I leave high school will. Harrisburg, I'm your opportunity to get this right. You do not have to wait for the courts to fix PA's broken funding system. You can do it now. My future depends on you getting this right.
So as you can see, pretty powerful commentary that was provided earlier today. We were honored to be part of that event earlier today and to provide some commentary there. So at this time, we want to invite Tamia Scipio-Smith to the front and have her share some comments. Tamia serves as the policy director for Children First, one of the organizations that helped plan all of the vigils that have occurred across the Commonwealth. We work together through our PA School Works campaign, which is a statewide coalition that's fighting for adequate and equitable school funding to ensure that all communities get the funding that they receive and students get the resources that they need. So Tamia.
And thank you to the Urban League for being such great partners in this work. I'm actually here at the Norristown rally, and behind us, or behind the doors, right behind us, are a group of students who are asking for the state to support their schools. It shouldn't be that a lawsuit had to be filed in order to get the state to invest in our students. The words of Pennsylvania's Constitution Requiring them to provide a thorough and efficient education should have really been enough. Yet each year, students in Philadelphia, William Penn, Upper Darby, Southeast Delco, Pottstown, Norristown, Panther Valley, Greater Johnstown, Shenandoah Valley, and Lancaster have struggled for enough resources to address these challenges that our students face. Most of these students, or most of these districts, serve students of color or poor students. We know that these are generally the students that require the most resources. And when it comes to the question of what a thorough and efficient education looks like, Harrisburg is choosing not to support our students. When the attorney that represents the state has the unmitigated gall to say to a superintendent on the stand who is saying that his students don't have enough, and this is what their question is. The question in my mind is thorough and efficient to what end? To serve the needs of the Commonwealth, Krill said. Lest we forget, the Commonwealth has many needs. There's a need for retail workers or people who know how to flip a pizza crust. Or what use would someone on the McDonald's career track have for Algebra 1? This is what they are telling our students, and this is what they want our students to believe. These lawmakers are saying that our students don't matter, but we already know money does matter. Without resources, our students struggle. We know that our children have the potential and can accomplish great things if we invest in them. We know that, but there's also research to back it up. When students have access, especially poor students, children of color, or English language learners, to resources like reading and math specialists, more kids make the grade, graduation rates go up, and those students have a clear path to success. We shouldn't have to imagine what our children could do if our schools consistently had the funding that they need. But instead, they're facing this $4.6 billion shortfall. And I'm sure, like you've heard from the president and CEO, Andrea Custis, I'm sure you heard from Senator Hughes, that this year in Harrisburg, there's money to fill in those gaps. Pennsylvania owes it to our students today. Closing arguments may be over, but we must continue to fight for our students. Here are some things you can do today to make sure that our students have what they need. You can write your lawmakers to tell Harrisburg to adequately and equitably fund our schools now. They will vote on a budget in June. This year, they have more money than they ever have had. They can use those funds to close that $4.6 billion shortfall. They can also support the governor's ask for $1 billion in basic education funding, $300 million to the 100 school districts that are the farthest away from equity and adequacy, those districts that educate the majority of our students of color, $200 million for special education funding. And they can sign up for information from PA Schools Work, the coalition that Thomas mentioned that we are partners in. You can ask your school district to pass a resolution that's in favor of the lawsuit. You can also write op-eds and tell your community why fair funding matters to this district, to your district, to all the districts that are unequitably and inadequately funded. And vote in every election for lawmakers who understand that the adequate and equitable education funding for your school district matters. Take the opportunity to turn your anger into action for our schools.
Great, thank you very much, Tamia. As we talked about earlier, there's so much that can be done. Let me go together. So much that can be done to ensure that all of our communities are fighting. So as Tamia mentioned, we are in a budget season. So our elected officials right now are negotiating on the budget. There are definite asks that are out there that you can be in support of. One of the things you will notice in the PA School Works campaign, we have talking points that you can leverage, that when you meet with your legislator, you can leverage these talking points so that you are comfortable with what you are talking about. You feel confident in sharing why these legislators need to vote for this budget. more importantly, let's ask, think to yourself and analyze this process. Who are the legislators that are against us? And ask yourself, who do I know in those communities? And how do I activate those cities that are maybe not in Philadelphia to put pressure on their legislators? Because at the end of the day, it's about thinking about how do we convert no's to yeses. And that may not be here in Philadelphia, that may not be in Pittsburgh, there may be in places that don't have people that look like us, but yet their legislators are currently voting in a way that's impacting us in Philadelphia. So you may have to think, if I am not here, if I am not in those places, who do I know in those places? And as we know, the power of the Divine Nine, we are in all those cities. We are across this Commonwealth, influencing communities. So when you think about what can I be doing, as Tamia mentioned, writing to your legislator, writing letters to the editor, how do we take advantage of these resources that we know legislators pay attention to? Legislators care when their name is in a newspaper. They care if their school district is using some of these media tools to share their message. So let's leverage those tools. And I encourage you to consider doing so. You may decide to do so as an individual. You may decide to do so on behalf of your organization. There is so much that can be done, not just amongst us here, but across this Commonwealth. So, when we think about what needs to be done, it's really about thinking about strategy, thinking about how do we convert no's to yeses, and how do we activate areas that are currently no's and get them to become yeses. So if you have interest in doing so, you can always feel free to reach out to the Urban League. We can get you plugged into the work that we're doing as part of our work with amplifying the need for adequate and equitable school funding. We encourage you to join the campaign and just continue to follow all the work that we're doing. We do have a few minutes, so I do want to see if there's any immediate questions. We are towards the end of our presentation, but I want to make sure that I maximize the 5 minutes that Andrea Custis has allocated to me so that we can be done at 8 o'clock. So are there any questions from anyone in the
I
room
just
today?
say something, and Tiffany better not say to her boss, to Senator Hughes, but I just want to thank you for respecting and honoring our time, for sure, Thomas. And also, thank you for bringing us together. And I just want to also acknowledge Dan and Tamia. If I have to look at my two heroes right now, it is Dan and Tamia, who have absolutely been, they've been tireless in doing the work that they've done. We would not be here. I thank the whole coalition, right? 30, 40 of us who have worked really hard, but I have to give big thanks and big kudos to both Dan and to Tamia. Thank you for being so diligent. Thank you for being so persistent. Thank you for giving us every breath in your body to get us where we are today. So thank you on behalf of the Urban League and everyone else on this call.
Great, great. Are there any questions, any quick questions that people may have? We'll quickly try to entertain them now. And as we said, it's really about activation at this point. We know that ultimately we could rely on the judge to make this ruling, but the problem can be fixed now. And it really takes activating in our legislators and making sure that they understand that we are monitoring and that we care about this issue. As we know, this is election season, 2022, there's important elections. So if you want to think about how do we leverage elections to kind of put a little bit of pressure on legislators, those that are current, those that are thinking of running, you may want to let them know that education is a top priority for you and ask them how do they plan to address this issue. Great, great. Well, want to say thank you everyone for joining us. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at the Urban League. Feel free to reach out to any of the host organizations that have shared their commitment. Once again, we want to thank all the speakers. We want to thank all the organizations that helped to bring this event to the community. The recording of this will be shared with those that register. You can also go to the Urban League Facebook page to share this presentation. We encourage you to share on that page, because what we really want to do is amplify this to the broader community. We know through social media, so much is shared. So we encourage you to go to our Facebook page, share this video feed so that many more can follow what was said today, and more importantly, get this information so that they can activate and advocate for their community. So with that, thank you very much.